Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Welcome to our end of 2022 Keys webinar. We will wrap together this year, a year of permacrisis and polycrisis, which means a year, of course, of many challenges, all happening together. So we have the post-COVID uncertainties, we have the war in Ukraine, we have climate change that we've been hearing a lot about, inflation, and of course, the rise of the cost of living. So we'll reflect on what we have learned from all this and how we can stay prepared and resilient for the new year. So on our agenda for you today, we have first Simon, which not surprisingly will take us through public opinion around the world in 2022. After that, Özlem, who is joining us from Istanbul, we'll hear with her about the old story and the new story of inflation in Turkey, a market that knows a lot about inflation and how people have been adapting to very exhausting new realities. Then we will zoom into the Latin American context with Cristina Paez. She is joining us from Guayaquil, Ecuador, and she will talk to us about the New World Disorder. And finally, we will have Alexandre de Saint-Léon, who will take us for a drive on the road ahead, helping us to see how the future of mobility will impact our everyday lives. And when we finish the presentations, we will also have a little time for Q&A with the presenters. So please don't hesitate to use the chat box to type your questions so that we can then retrieve them and use them to stimulate the discussion. And with that, I will hand over to Simon.
Well, thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, everybody. Yes, we're going to finish with the road ahead, but we'll start by looking in the rearview mirror and think about the year that we've all lived through. And what we've tried to do is look at each of the months of the year, pull out an event and find something from the lens of public opinion that we hope tells us something about people's experience on the ground. So go back to January. We had Omicron back with us. We had COVID back in first place as the #1 issue facing the world. Where are we now is the landscape feels rather different. We've got the lowest ever number of people worried about COVID. It's in 12th place overall, and in almost, well, everywhere, in fact, it has fallen back in the list of worries very, very considerably. We've moved on to other concerns that have become front and center, and nowhere more than in Ukraine, which is the big, I think, defining event of the year. Lots of research, of course, on this topic. We've continued doing research on the ground in Ukraine, and our resilience monitor showcases just the difficulties that people are going through living in Ukraine right now, the access to essentials and the problems people have getting access to drinking water, and also the very real economic pressures that the population is facing and will face during the period ahead. In March, we drew out the Antarctic heatwave, a place where no one lives, but a place that affects us all. And the real finding there, I think we wanted to draw on, was noticing that people across 34 countries are now saying that they are feeling the effects of climate change in the area where they live. As Christina will show us later, we have many, many other concerns as well, but quite striking to see a majority of people saying, yes, I see the impact right here, right now, where I live. That was a year of elections in Brazil, in Italy, and many other places. In April, we saw the French election. And what we've tried to do throughout the period of time is to see where people's mood is around the world in terms of the political and economic system we have in our own countries. Strikingly, we have 64% of people saying the economy of my country is rigged to favour the rich and powerful. But perhaps a glimmer of slightly better news in that our broken system sentiment, as we charmingly call it, has actually receded over the last 18 months, and particularly in some countries where there have been elections, we're seeing people a little bit more positive, or maybe I should say a little bit less negative about the political and economic system that exists around them. And talking about economic systems, of course, inflation being a huge story of the year, We chose May because that was the month when a United Nations report came out looking at the world economic system, looking at its prospects, and highlighting, I think, one particularly important point, because they noted that rising inflation in the developed countries had received a lot of attention, but they also noticed and remarked on just the impact it was now starting to have on developing markets as well. And we see this in our What Worries the World chart. This is an 18-month view from April 2021 to November of this year. And in every country that we're covering, we're seeing a huge increase in the proportion of people concerned about inflation. Look at the third country down, Turkey. We'll hear from Özlem on that point in just a short moment. In June, we saw the United States Supreme Court overturn the landmark federal ruling from the Roe versus Wade case back in 1973. And we've been continuing to track societal attitudes towards abortion this year. Globally, 3 in 5 people say abortion should be legal in all or most cases. But it's a reminder also of how the country context differs from where you're sitting in the world. And that particular study in 27 countries underlines the importance for us to be careful about where we generalize and be mindful of needing to go and look at the specific circumstances. Now, talking of specific circumstances, we're going back to France in July. We could have chosen Greece or Spain or Portugal, or even my own country, the UK, to talk about the summer heat waves. But we chose France because France, just a few short weeks after those summer heat waves, was the country which showed the highest level of concern about climate change that we've recorded in 2022. And although it's rarely absolutely at the top of the list of people's concerns, it's very much rising up the agenda in the What Worries the World study. In August, we saw the death of Mikhail Gorbachev, who is seen by many as being one of the architects of the end of the Cold War period. But as so often in life, some things change and some things stay the same. And one of the things that's still with us is that nuclear, biological, or chemical attack are now seen as the top threat facing the world. And rather alarmingly, we have 50% of people in this international study are saying they're worried that my own country may be involved in some kind of armed conflict with another nation over the next 12 months. Another end of an era was in my own country. We saw the death of Queen Elizabeth II after 70 years on the throne. I've actually chosen some data from Canada, though, to follow up on the implications of this point, because a little bit of a case study of how people often find conflicting opinions all at the same time. So Canadians, at the same time, they say the Queen did a good job as monarch. They say Canada should now end its ties, however, with the monarchy as it looks ahead. But they also pause and they say, actually, the relationship with the monarchy helps keep us separate from our southern neighbours in the United States. And I found this a bit of a reminder of how public opinion is often something that isn't always consistent, and we need to stay close to it in various ways. If we get to October, we see the return of the Paris Motor Show, which comes at a time when the European Union is banning new fossil fuel cars from 2035. Alexandra will pick up on public opinion on that point in just a moment. In November, we welcomed Damien in the Dominican Republic as the world's 8th billion inhabitant. He joins the world at a time, however, when population growth rates are now going to start to slow. And it's a big topic for us all to reflect on during the next 10, 20, 30 years. We talked about this at one of our earlier webinars this year. We were looking at India, which will now become the most populous country in the world. But if you look on the right-hand side, its population is already getting ready to fall as the fertility rate goes below replacement level. We also looked at India, which has a population profile that's looking very particular. It's the opposite of what we learned at school. And Italy is now thinking about how it adapts to a population that is actually falling. One thing Italy hasn't been doing this last few weeks has been being part of the World Cup in Qatar. Many countries, of course, have been, and it's an opportunity for us to reflect on how we see our own countries around the world. I'm going to share with you some optimism going into the World Cup process. In Brazil, 66% expected their country to reach the final. We now know that optimism was perhaps unfounded. In France, people were rather more modest, perhaps in their aspirations, although they were already the champions, but people a bit careful about what would happen next. In Argentina, rather more optimism. So the wisdom of crowds we see in the final on Sunday, but again, an interesting example of how we see our own countries. How do other people see our own countries? Well, this study we thought was very interesting, again, as we look ahead to a continued period of geopolitical instability. Canada and Germany and France are all getting higher ratings when we look at how people see their role, their influence on world affairs. They're getting higher ratings than some of the international organizations like the United Nations, NATO, or the World Bank. So with that, my tour of public opinion is over for this year. If you like more, there are links to each of the things I've been sharing in the deck. There's also even more in our Ipsos Almanac that we publish next week. But for now, thank you very much for listening to us and being with us this year. And I'll hand back to Jennifer to take us forward.
Thanks, Simon, for that tour back into all the milestones of 2022. I found it really interesting. And of course, inflation was a very clear presence. So we're all very keen to hear from you, Özlem, as you have such a great experience to share with us. Over to you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Sorry. Hello, everyone. Today, I want to tell you the story of a resilient society. In Turkey, we have been facing a different macro issue every year for a long time, such as political tensions, immigrants, COVID, and most recently, hyperinflation conditions. And we succeed to adapt all these conditions in our way. Maybe for some countries, inflation is a new concept and they are trying to understand its reflection to their life. But actually, in Turkey, we are very familiar with this terminology. About 20 years ago, we had high inflation for a long time. And after a short break, it started to increase again in 2018 and finally has reached hyperinflation level, which is 84%, according to November statistics. There are some reasons behind the fact that inflation is so high in Turkey compared to the rest of the world, but that is not the question that matters to us. The important question is, in Turkey, how we managed our lives under these conditions. Last year, in November, we start to make some revenge plans after Corona period. It's a worldwide classic, like saving money, traveling nice places. But in December, only 1 month later, we started to feel the pressure of extraordinary price increases on our budget. And the inflation continued to increase all year long and, as expected, has impacted our decision ecosystem. For example, now some concepts are at the center of our decision journey, such as trade-offs, cut-offs, budget management, affordability, and keeping the experience. So, what happened to our revenge plans? All revenge plans require extra money, but we quickly realized we didn't have that money. And we revised all our plans during the year. Our first plan revision was same money motto changed as find more money. There are two important reasons behind this change. First one, due to low interest rate of central bank, it is meaningless. Maybe you can save the money, but keeping the value of money is so complicated for an ordinary citizen. And as a result of this, according to our research findings, we observed that the tendency to save money decreased and the expectation of going into debt increased. And second reason, and I think the main reason, is the cost of living problem. Announced inflation is just a basket calculation. For example, the more critical items in our spending, such as energy, food, and transportation costs, increased well above inflation, and so as expected, it negatively affected our purchasing power and standard of living. The was visiting nice places, but unfortunately, these revenge travel plans were also cancelled. Maybe we couldn't see new places, but we all become a promotion or cheapest option seeker. This year, we have visited more stores, but we only shopped where we saw the best offers for our budgets. And yes, leisure trips are expensive even for a normal time period in Turkey, but at least we should have been able to go out for a dinner or for socializing, but with limited budget, this is also not convenient for most of us. Or trade-offs realize that bring the experience to the home or find an affordable way to spending time outside. For example, we love to go somewhere like park or seaside with our camping chair and thermos for spending time outside. Is also important in Turkey because of food spendings have a lion's share in FMCG budget, and hunger management is the main topic for understanding the trade-offs and cut-offs between the categories. For example, essential foods and dairy continue to grow. Not solid chocolate, but chocolate-covered biscuits, cereals growth is higher than market average because they also can be positioned as a meal or have suppresses the hunger in consumers' life. Also, juice and coffee have similar position, but meat and meat products are one of the shrinking categories because it is very expensive meal and can be substituted with different foods. What happened to up to this part is more about budget management and adaptation. According to, again, the research findings, our society think that the inflation crisis will continue for 3 more years. And during all this period, our most dominant emotion is feeling exhausted. Plus, we are the unhappiest country in the global happiness survey of Ipsos. For example, 10 years ago, Turkey was one of the happiest countries according to the same research result. Wellness, especially mental health, is not on our agenda at the moment, but feeling the pressure so deeply will, of course, negatively affect the future of our society. And brands, of course, have also adapted their action plans according to the cost of living crisis. When successful examples shared in this hyperinflation period, especially the discounters should be mentioned in Turkey. They have the most recognized TV ad campaigns, and they organize weekly in and outs in order to keep consumer curiosity alive and increase their wallet share in also non-FMCG categories. And for private label products, they use the Superior Taste Award as an endorser to raise their perception of the products as affordable, but also high quality. For FMCG companies, reformulation or shrinkflation are regular actions in Turkey. On the other hand, they launched a lot of solution-oriented innovation. For example, Ox is a cleaning product brand, and they try to catch the attention of consumers according to all platforms, such as short and catchy ads, visible colors on shelf, and cheap price point for creating trial. Damak is a local nested sub-brand, and they integrated the baklava, which is a premium and expensive traditional dessert, to their chocolate. And also there are some inspiring line extensions that target hunger management motivation of consumers. Even global companies try to adapt their message to today's conditions. For example, Fairy has used as a claim, use Fairy and don't waste electricity, save your budget and save the world. Ruffles has a new message, not only for pleasure, eat for suppressing your hunger with grilled meat flavor. So is the story over? Unfortunately, the story isn't over. According to Ipsos Global Inflation Monitor results, there is a worldwide consensus the period of inflation and its negative effects will continue. And we know that there will be always macro pressures, but we will always find a solution. Thanks to all for your time and attention. The stage is yours, Jennifer.
Thank you so much, Özlem. You've really made us feel what it's like to be a consumer living in Turkey. Very impactful. So I was wondering if you would like to share with us something about you personally. I mean, how have you been coping living in this like hyperinflation context?
It's not easy question, really, Jennifer. I will mention only my memory about that. 2 months ago, I decided to buy an air fryer, and I checked the price, and it was 5,000 Turkish lira. But my limit of my credit card was not available, and I said, okay, I can buy it 3 weeks later. Only 1 week later, I checked the price, and it was 7,000 Turkish lira. And after 3 weeks later, I purchased it, and the price was 10,000 Turkish lira. After just 3 weeks, the price is doubled. Making a decision is not enough under hyperinflation conditions. We need to implement our decisions so quickly. If not, you can't maybe buy what you want, unfortunately.
I hope your air fryer does a good job, Özlem, since you paid it twice what you were planning to.
I am not sure, but I checked today again the price because I'm really curious about it. Now it's 11. It's going up.
Oh.
Yes.
Okay, anyway, so hope you enjoy it. And thank you so much for sharing your stories with us.
Thank you.
We're going to travel to another part of the world now and ask Christina to tell us a little bit what's going on in her region. Christina, over to you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Well, it's an absolute honor to present a short preview of one of the most cherished research projects we at Ipsos conduct every year. This time covering 50 markets, over 40,000 people, and 70% of the population. So get comfortable and enjoy an exclusive sneak peek at some of the themes that are coming through in the 2023 Ipsos Global Trends. A world not in crisis, but in polycrisis, like Simon was mentioning earlier on, which translates into consumers' lives facing a constant exposure to negativity from the media and other sources that could potentially become an excuse for more isolation, the same that we saw during the pandemic, and fear despite the eagerness to prosper and to recover that time we lost during COVID. Yet it is very important, and I'm going to mention this throughout my presentation, as business leaders and as guardians of the world's most beloved brands, to really internalize that only a deep, comprehensive understanding of the world context and our local realities will provide the right answer to our clients' business questions. So that is our work purpose at Ipsos, to generate data for a better understanding of reality, whether it's global, local, whether it shows where we have a common path or where our paths diverge. A key takeaway that we're seeing from the Global Trends report is that people in each country identify different building blocks for their perceived polycrisis, tradition, family, national celebrations, to mention a few, for example, are very important in Mexico, versus the need for individualism, freedom, and inclusion, which are more relevant in Brazil. And how this translates to brands and consumers. We see almost 60% of people in Brazil willing to invest in a brand that its image appeals to them, versus only 40% in Mexico. 12 Ipsos Global Trends have been identified, but today I will preview 5 of the themes that I think we need to keep in mind from this last wave. The first and perhaps biggest theme is that there is an economic crisis. Of course, we just saw from what Özlem told us, this is a reality, it's happening to all of us. And we need to be aware that this is hitting our wallets and our hearts. We know that inflation is growing in many markets and a financial crisis is apparently coming to many of us. The second and third have to do with a growing tension between global and local, and as I was mentioning before, and a debate around what and if something should be done and by whom to address climate change, as Simon mentioned. Fourth and fifth have to do with the gap between what people in LATAM expect from businesses in this new digital era and how nostalgia is driving brands' communications, because they seem to have found a straight path into our Latin American hearts. And that is something that we will see a lot of in 2023. So the first theme is really the story of an economic crisis. We're all kind of getting used to the word and the effects that an economic crisis can bring. In the LATAM region, we're kind of experts in the matter. We're used to living at the edge of our seats with uncertainty in government leadership, in democracy, in security, and in life in general. But now we think we have reached a tipping point. Just this last Friday, in our neighbor country, Peru, there was an attempt of a coup d'etat. They have a new president. And also in Argentina, former Argentina's president was convicted to 6 years in prison for corruption during her mandate. And 3 of the most important provinces in Ecuador have just now been declared under exception state due to drug cartels, increased violence attacks the civilians are facing just now. So in a moment when trust in business leader is on the rise in globally, where only 3% of Ecuadorians trust politicians and over 60% put their trust in corporations and brands, we think it is very important to ask ourselves, are companies ready to face the challenge and become what people actually need that they are not getting from their governors? What is the role our brands should play in this new scenario of widespread mistrust in some of the LATAM countries? But beware, since in some other countries, what we're seeing right now also is how trust in the rulers and the institutional framework is beginning to recover. The next shift we're seeing is a crisis of tensions between global and local. To be clear, we still value globalism at a global state. Many people across many markets believe that globalization is, of course, good for them, for their children. But in the past years, we saw a lot of increased interest in local brands. And particularly, remember, during the pandemic, we wanted to support our local brands as we wanted them to survive the crisis that we're going through. So, and many of us thought actually that the trend line will continue towards local, but actually it has reversed. And that's a very important point. In Ecuador, 88% of people recently indicated that products manufactured in the country did actually make them feel proud to be Ecuadorians. But at the same time, a greater part of those same users believe that imported products have a better perception of quality. We see that this actually influences purchase behaviors, and that is why it's important to analyze it and to understand it at a local basis as well. It is worth mentioning that baby boomers are more eager to buy locally, at least here in Ecuador, whereas young people prefer imported products because they consider them to be more reliable, make them feel more globalized, more trendy. So this is something that we need to look out for. We all know going to the next one, that climate is degrading at an alarming rate, yet people find their attention drawn to more pressing day-to-day concerns as the ones I just mentioned before. Ecuador, for example, is one of the world's richest countries in terms of biodiversity, and we are aligned with its eco-responsible approach. We just actually built the first sustainable airport in the world, located in the Galapagos Islands, which is one of the most important natural laboratories of the planet. But Latin Americans, we have much greater problems at hand, with 52% of Ecuadorians worried about crime and violence right now, and only 4% worried about climate change. 53% of Peruvians worried about corruption, and only 5% worried about climate change. 40% of Colombians worried about unemployment, and only 10% worried about climate change. Now, globally, environmental concerns are not on the top of those surveyed by Ipsos. Other issues such as inflation, as we saw in Turkey, and unemployment in Colombia topple them. But without a doubt, this is something very important to have in mind, because we know that it is at the center of the table for business decisions, and is generating new approaches to business models, to product development and services, as we will see later on in the presentation that Alexander is going to share with us. So something very important, and just kind of to conclude, is that we really need to understand that this data shown today is just the starting point to bringing solutions to the crisis that build today's polycrisis, this reality in where we're living right now. Back to you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Christina, and definitely a lot of variables to think about when we think about working in your region. And you see lots of clients, of course, and you give advice to them every day. So I was wondering, just as a quick sort of sum up, could you tell us what kind of advice, like the key advice that you would be giving to clients today in your region?
Yes, well, first of all, and most important, to stay tuned, because in January, we will do the full release for the Ipsos Global Trends. And I encourage them to dive deep into the trends and then try to bring them down to their own realities in their local markets. The trends will allow them to understand that we have these realities going on in the world, and we need to match these trends with signals, specific signals of behaviors in each country, to understand how these global trends are affecting people's behaviors, wants, and needs.
Great. Okay, so stay tuned, basically. Thank you very much, Christina. And Alexandre, I think we're all ready to go with you for our drive as the last stretch of our webinar today.
Thank you, Jennifer. Yes, I'm very happy and very honored to take you through a short tour around what has happened this year and what will happen next around the mobility and the automotive landscape. Let's go through it, and I would like to start with a first point on sustainability. As Christina mentioned, I think it's important because this is certainly what is driving many of the changes we see in the automotive and the mobility sector. We've seen in the past years, and we'll see coming next. It's true that, and here it's only the latest data that I'm showing on some major automotive markets. It's true that the concern over the disaster we're heading through unless we change our habits is not growing anymore. It's not increasing, but it's very high. You know, we have in average 80% or more than 80% in some of those markets of consumers or citizens who tell us we need to change. If we do not change, we're heading towards a disaster. It's extremely high. And what I think is interesting is that we've now reached a position where there is consensus, an aligned decision or perception of that this is an imperative, and indeed it is having big impact on the automotive and the mobility decision. The first one that we already have seen and that is clearer year after year or month after month is the electrification of new car sales. In 2022, from January until October, because those are the latest data that are available, the segment of new car sales of electrified vehicles, which are composed of different segments, but it's battery electric, hybrid, or PH plug-in hybrids vehicles, that segment have increased by 42% versus 2021. In the meantime, the thermal vehicles, so the traditional engines, have decreased by 9%. This is just in a way speeding up, and the gap is widening between both types of new cars. And we've seen it's not yet impacting all markets. You see Brazil or India, where so far there are plans from automakers, but it's not happening yet in the market. But in markets in Europe or in Japan, and specifically we see Germany and Great Britain, where we're almost reaching 50% of new car sales being electric. So it's really a fantastic changes that is happening. Probably very interesting, but also that is generating a lot of debates. And you see, and that's I often get the question, what's the problem around the automotive and those new cars? Why do we have such strong and divided opinions? Are we in a crisis? Well, indeed, you could think we are in the crisis, considering the fact that the volume of new car sales and production has decreased significantly compared to pre-COVID. We are approximately 15% down compared to 2019, 2018. So it's a lot. It's difficult for. It was very difficult for manufacturers to adapt to that new reality. However, manufacturers have done a fantastic job, and they are making more profits than they ever made. They're also making fantastic, huge investments because they need to adapt to that market transformation. But I don't think it's only a market transformation. Although everything is changing in the automotive industry, it's more than automotive. It goes beyond that, and I do believe we're going through a mobility revolution. I will show you a bit how this is impacting. First, talking about electrification and the debates we're having. Simon has mentioned the fact that in June, the EU lawmakers have approved the ban of thermal engines for new car sales in 2035. We did a survey a few months ago around the Paris Auto Show with French, Germans, UK and Italy citizens to understand their perceptions of this ban. Only 54% are approving the decision. And so 54 is not huge. Remember, they tell us 80% we need to change our habits, we need to change the way we do or the way we behave, or we'll head toward disasters, but only 54% approve that ban. And even in France, it's only 39%. And in the UK, after Brexit, we approve it by 65%, which is amazing. Why do we see those changes? I don't have time to take you through all the information we got around the resistance to the decision. There is a lot of reluctance to change, and lots of surveys we have around that show us that even though there is a clear alignment on the imperative, it's very difficult to change such behaviors. Consumers' position changing, their habits of motorized mobility as the most difficult one to change because of the way they are equipped, because of the infrastructure, because of what is available for them. Many of them just have to use their cars, so it's very difficult to change. There are lots of fears around the infrastructure available to charge the batteries of the new cars. There are concerns about the charging experience. There is a lot of tension, or there is significant tension or discussions between the different stakeholders that they transmits the feeling of a lack of alignment, and in doubt, consumers either postpone their decisions, either they stay with what they know. So that this is impacting also the decision. And one of the key topic as well is the affordability of new EV cars. At a similar level of feature equipment, a new EV car will be 15 to 20% more expensive than a traditional engine, and this is a great issue because it keeps a big part of the consumers out of the market, and we need to find alternatives to that. I will mention that in the next slide. Having mentioned all those reasons why people may be reluctant, what is very interesting is that when you interview new BEV owners, they are enthusiastic. They love the experience. They say it's better than what we had in the past, and I wouldn't change. So, alternatives for a sustainable automotive solution. We've tested in the same survey a couple of alternatives that are coming up as other ways to emission. And what I wanted to share, without getting into too much details, is that, for example, retrofitting, which is converting your vehicle to an electric engine,
We're having some connection problems with Alexandre. Alexandre? Il nous entend pas. Okay, so we're seeing him going through the alternatives. I think they're self-explanatory, but unfortunately we can't hear him. And he doesn't hear us.
and choices that they didn't have in the past. And this is really participating in the transformation or the revolution of mobility. What we see, and that's another reason why we believe that really it's a revolution that is going on. We see lots of new players coming in with new concepts. You have news almost every day around the new players, new concept coming. The last one, I think was fantastic, around the passenger drone taking you to the sky. We see, and all the analysts consider, that this is becoming a really big business, and it will continue to grow. At least $800 billion as a market size for mobility as a service in the US only by 2030. Imagine what it will be for the rest of the world. And so we have lots of new players, traditional players also heavily investing in those new mobility solutions. And today is still a very open battle for leadership. So it's really a fantastic moment for the automotive and mobility industry, with lots of changes coming up. We have, and I wanted to share just a preview today of new data we're collecting in order to understand the type of decisions that consumers are now making almost on a daily basis. We're started to collect a new mobility tracking solution to understand the share of trips on different days of the week by consumer profile, by type of trips done, because it's different when it's you're commuting, you're taking your kids to school, you're taking your kids outside. So all this is important information that we are now just collecting. This was this came up a few hours ago. We've also a good understanding of why people choose a specific mode, which provider they select when it's a solution, and ratings and detailed experience ratings on each of those. So this is starting to come. It's a big new initiative that we launched. We will do a full release in January. I hope you'll be with us for that, with 7 markets covered and more than 10 metropolitan areas covered as well. Thank you.
Sounds good, Alexandre. You talked a lot about electrification, of course, and I'm going to ask you a question which is about a debate that I think all of us have been hearing a lot about, which is, are electric cars really more sustainable?
So yes, there have been lots of debates around that. Of course, I'm a researcher, so I'm not technically, in theory, I shouldn't answer to that, but I've read a lot about that, and I've listened to experts on this. The reality is, when you drive your electric car, if the electricity that has powered it is green, it is, of course, not emitting any gas, so it's much more sustainable than a traditional engine. However, to produce an electric vehicle, you emit much more gas. Well, you can emit more gas than you do for a traditional engine. So it's true especially for SUVs, premium SUVs with very equipped. They will to produce it, you will spend more gas, but over the time when you use it, and normally it's around 60,000 kilometers approximately, then you've offset the initial gas, and you start to win. So the short answer is yes, but it needs some time until you offset the initial extra emissions that you have.
Great, thank you. Thank you for clarifying that for us. So it's a long-term game, very
Yes.
clear. Thank you very much, Alexandre. And Simon, we now have a little time for some Q&A. I wonder if, I know you've been checking questions in the background. Do we have any questions for our
we do.
presenters?
Yes.
Yeah. Great.
And I'll start with, I can start with Alexandra, because you talked about, you were talking about a revolution, as the song goes, and one of our colleagues on the call wanted your views on, I can't even say it, autonomous driving, because we know that this is kind of possible and kind of coming, but what should we look out for over the period ahead in terms of whether that's part of the revolution that we should be expecting?
So that's a good question. Yes, there are lots of investment around autonomous driving. It's not something that consumers today are really ready to adopt, as for personal use. Mm-hmm. And in all the analysis that we've done, some of them, of course, you always have early adopters and who are willing to take it, but not a majority. They're using now autonomous features in many cars. You're happy to have your car park itself. You're happy to have it on autonomous driving for very limited areas. But what we believe will happen is more commercial applications of autonomous driving before it really becomes a personal usage on a daily basis. So you will have more autonomous shuttles, autonomous delivery, even autonomous, in a way, food trucks or food delivery that will be on very specific trips. I think you will see that before you will see real autonomous car in the streets of London or anywhere.
Okay. So more focused, more niche, but perhaps actually certainly something we need to take account of as we look ahead. Okay, lovely. Well, one thing which is very real, which Özlem, you talked about both your own experience as a consumer with your famous air fryer, but also how the different brands were responding to this very dynamic environment. And I think you share those examples, and we had one of our attendees wanted you to give them a little bit more on perhaps your advice for what companies can do better to meet the needs of consumers like yourself or your neighbours in this very special environment.
Simon, thanks for these questions. I think it's very well. Companies are very focused on their financial targets due to hyperinflation conditions, and there is profit pressure. However, these are the answers to today's problems. We should also focus on what we can do for society and for supporting them. For example, the younger generation is at the center of a challenging agenda for a significant time period for their life. When more stable conditions come through, we will want to accompany them on their revenge journey as our employees or as our consumers. But their life experiences were first reframed by COVID and now surrounded by financial difficulties. So yes, it's a difficult period financially, but especially supporting the community on social issues should be on our agenda for investing the future.
Okay, so sort of being partners in that journey. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, one thing I guess talking about being partners perhaps brings us on to the question that we had on the global trends, because Christina, you highlighted the point about digital transformation, and I think the question we had was is there anything that we're learning about any gaps perhaps between let's say our own expectations as consumers and what the companies or the brands or indeed the governments around us are actually providing us in terms of the services that we need?
Yes, Simon, actually we are seeing a gap in the LATAM region, and especially in Ecuador. The number of people shopping online via Instagram, WhatsApp has risen. Latin Americans mention that they're getting better deals online than in traditional stores, but there are a lot of tensions remaining in these relationships because the experiences brands are providing to consumers are still below expectations in the region. Many of these businesses that are actually selling online or via WhatsApp, Instagram, or on their web pages even are not mobile friendly, for example, do not have their full catalog of merchandise displayed. They have problems with the paying platforms as well as with the deliveries of the products that people have purchased. So yes, there is a huge opportunity for businesses and for brands to analyze how they can improve the user experience in these occasions.
And on the user experience, so coming on to Alexandra, actually, question about the user experience of new car buyers. You mentioned how it's changing so quickly, actually, and now in at least some markets, and you rightly reminded us that we need to look at them very, very specifically.
Yeah.
But perhaps in some of those markets, like in China or in Western Europe, where we're seeing a significant proportion of people buying electric cars now, is that experience changing? Are the auto providers adapting quickly enough to what's possible in the market?
They're adding a lot of new features. So actually, yes, the experience is changing radically, and we do a lot of specific work around UX in automotive to allow manufacturers to understand how they need to adapt first the new technology they're embarking, because there is a new way of communication between the driver, the passenger, and the vehicle. You know, it's completely different in an electric car than it is in a traditional engine. You don't have the same message from the engine, actually. And also what is difficult is that they need to adjust also to different cultures. You know, the type of interface that you expect and you're happy with in China or in Japan have nothing to do with the type of interface that you agree with in Europe or in the US. So it's difficult for them to understand how they need to adapt the interfaces that they create between markets and between different manufacturers. But yes, it's a totally different experience, and very enthusiastic, interesting, because you have lots of opportunities, but also the risk to create problems or difficulties for the consumers is higher than on a traditional engine.
Okay. Well, you mentioned again the differences between markets, and Christina, I'm going to come to you because you know, you're reminding us that, you know, we've got people from 60 countries on this call today. You reminded us of the difference between Brazil and Mexico on the way in, just in terms of broad attitudes towards brands. Are there any other particular differences or similarities you might want to draw our attention to if we're looking at Latin America and trying to understand the region better?
Yeah, we, for example, have a couple of countries where more broadly we share a majoritarian view that technical progress is destroying our lives. And that is crazy because it interferes with this desire to support this digital transformation and to move into electric cars. And oh my God, I need to get me one of those drones and bring it to Ecuador. But we see that technical progress is also affecting the way we live. We now see that youngsters are spending over 9 hours using their phones. So I don't know how this digital transformation can bring us together and can bring more solutions and better solutions to our daily lives without interfering with what we longed before or our ideas of having a good life quality. In Colombia, for example, 67 of those asked concur with such a view. Imagine, it's very, very high. And this is happening, and it's happening at a regional level, and it's happening at a global level as well. So for that, it's very important, as I was mentioning before, to be able to understand and to kind of sense and deep dive into identifying the signals. So what's going on in each country, in each category, for a specific brand or a product? Like, what's the opportunity in that space, you know, in order to be aligned with those expectations, but without going into the opposite, which Alexandra was mentioning right now. without creating problems or difficulties or barriers for consumers to actually buy your products or use your services.
Well, thank you, Lex. I know that question about expectations and great expectations perhaps is going to be a topic we're going to come to rather soon in this webinar series, because I think it's one we really should have a deep dive on. So thank you very much to all of our speakers. I'm going to hand back down to Jennifer to close the webinar.
Thank you. So lovely additional insights from everyone. And I must say thank you to all of you who are online and have been accompanying us this year. And we do look forward to seeing you again next year, namely on the 19th of January to discuss what to expect from the year ahead. Happy holidays to everyone and have a great end of the year and a happy start.
See you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.